David Cronenberg is a friend of mine. His approach to his movies is very intellectual. He's always thought everything out. I find Dead Ringers with those horrible instruments and Jeremy Irons' great dual performance to be actually very funny. It all really works. Those are words from director John Carpenter on David Cronenberg's 1988 film, Dead Ringers. Seeing Faces in Movies is a podcast where each month I focus on the works of a different director or cinematographer. And each week I invite a guest on to discuss a film in the artist's filmography. I'm your host, Felicia. Today we're talking Dead Ringers, so a quick synopsis of the film is twin gynecologists take full advantage of the fact that nobody can tell them apart until their relationship begins to deteriorate over a woman. Tagline for the film is two bodies, two minds, one soul. The film stars Jeremy Irons as Beverly and Elliot Mantle, Geneviève Bujold as Claire Niveau, Heidi Von Pulaski as Carrie, and Barbara Gordon as Danuta. It's written by David Cronenberg and Norman Snyder, cinematography by Peter Szyszewski, directed by David Cronenberg, edited by Ronald Sanders, music by Howard Shore, and costumes by Denise Cronenberg. Today, my guest is Miss Sinclair from the Talk Movie to Me podcast.
Hello. Hello.
You've been on this your third time. You're one of the few three-time guests that's been on.
Yeah.
So it's a special spot on the show. But obviously with Cronenberg, I was like, you have to come on. Well, I think I was talking about how I was about to start doing one. And it was like implied that you were going to join.
I know, but I feel like I would not have taken no for an answer if I had said, I'm coming on the Cronenberg series.
Yeah.
I would just force myself upon this podcast to talk about Cronenberg for sure.
Right, as you should. But before we get into Dead Ringers, Cronenberg, and your love of his work, Miss Sinclair's been on two times before. So we talked about Sunset Boulevard first and The Piano. Two great episodes. Highly recommend you go back and listen to those. Find out more about her interest in film, the Talk Movie to Me podcast, and just what she had been watching at the time. But I'm interested in what you've been watching more recently. What's good, what's out, that's worthwhile.
I mean, I will bring up two stinkers that I watched recently.
Good.
Well, I was in the body horror mood because we were going to be talking about Dead Ringers and our king, David Cronenberg. So I watched Society from 1989, the body horror film. Yeah. And I will say the body horror in this movie is really, really good. And it feels very Cronenberg inspired. It's really great, but that's about 20 minutes of the film. And the rest of the film is really, really, really bad.
Oh, yeah.
So if you could just watch 20 minutes of the body horror parts of this film, then I suggest that. But the rest of the film just, like truly, truly horrendous. I also, in preparation to discuss Furiosa on Talk Movie to Me, went back just to fill in some Mad Max blanks that I had, which was really only Mad Max 3 Beyond Thunderdome. I gotta say, truly horrendous as well. First of all, it feels like, I call it post-apocalyptic Goonies.
Oh God.
It has this like whimsical quality to it. It doesn't have anything that the second one has, which I think is just totally badass. So that was really interesting. That's a very unique franchise. It is very disjointed for sure. So I don't know if you are going to watch Furiosa or if you are a fan of Fury Road or Mad Max at all, but kind of wild. That world has changed over time and the journey that it's gone through, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know that there was a third one before Fury Road. I don't really know anything about Mad Max. I've never seen the first three. I've only seen Fury Road.
Okay.
I tried watching the first one once. It was on like AMC here, and I was like, yeah, I don't know what's going on. So I just didn't continue after the commercial break. So Fury Road, I'm gonna get hate, but absolutely hated that movie.
What?
Yeah, every second
Oh.
of it.
Ah!
I remember I watched it
Mm,
right after it came out, like on video or whatever, and I was like,
mm.
what the fuck is this? So I probably won't be watching the new one,
No.
realistically, but I know people love it. I've been hearing good things. I haven't really heard
Mhm,
anything bad about it, but Society's been
mhm.
on my watch list for a while. I always like the poster of it, but I figured it was kind of trash.
I mean, it is in a fun way, but yeah, it actually is truly it's a bad movie.
Yeah.
It's a bad movie that has really, really good body horror at certain
Okay.
film.
At least one good movie that you liked?
Well, you and I, for our bucket list, we finally watched Autofocus. We
Yeah.
did a little
hmm
more Paul Schrader. He definitely comes up on our bucket list adventures a lot. So I do feel pretty close to completing his filmography.
Yeah. Like in terms of like directing
Uh-huh.
filmography. Yeah.
Hmm.
I feel like I've probably seen a lot also. There's a couple, like I haven't seen Mishima yet.
Yes, I need to see that one, and I do need to see Light Sleeper as well.
Oh yeah, well I see what you'd like.
Yeah.
Mishima we should probably do for bucket list, to be
Yes.
honest, if we both
Yeah.
haven't seen it.
But, autofocus, just Hollywood history, there are so many things that I didn't actually know about that story, so we had a good time chatting about that. I actually learned a lot of unique facts about that
Yeah,
film, yeah.
that was
Mhm.
fun. I'll definitely have to do him on this show too at some point because
Oh, yeah.
he's got so many
I
bangers.
might force my way onto that series
I
as
mean,
well.
you don't even have to force yourself. We'll just do it. I'll just put your name down now. But Dead Ringers, we're here to talk about Dead Ringers from 1988. So
Yes.
at this point, Cronenberg's a name,
Mhm.
and he is in like a period of his career where he's known for body horror and he's trying something a little different
Mhm.
here in Dead Ringers. There is obviously body horror elements, but do you recall the first time you watched this movie and what your initial thoughts were on that watch?
Yeah, so this was actually a bit later in my film going adventures. I had seen a lot of his films before this one. I actually watched this one because on Talk Movie to Me on the podcast, I had said we should do the theme twins. We should,
Mm,
watch movies with the theme of twins. And I thought it was the perfect opportunity to watch Dead Ringers. I was blown away. I loved it, and it immediately shot up to the top of my list. I would say this and The Fly,
hmm
I think, are my top
Okay.
Cronenberg. I mean, Crash is up there too, but I think Dead Ringers and The Fly are like really at the top of my list. And when we were discussing, you doing a Cronenberg month, and you were like, what film would you want to discuss? It's so hard to actually choose with his
Yeah.
filmography. All his films, they truly live together in a utopia in my mind.
hmm
But I felt very, very moved by Dead Ringers. I feel like it is such a tragedy, and it's the other thing that I love about The Fly too. It's such a tragic story. Dead Ringers to me doesn't necessarily feel like a horror film, and I know David Cronenberg talks about how it is a bit of it is moving away a bit from horror in his opinion, and he considers it to be a drama. So it definitely affected me in an emotional way where I've enjoyed so many of his films, but this hit an emotional chord, and The Fly does that to me as well.
Okay. Was The
Hmm.
Fly the first Cronenberg you'd ever seen? Like, how did you
I,
even get
I,
into his work?
I honestly, it was Shivers.
Yeah.
It was Shivers, which is kind of a surprising choice.
Did you have the Scream channel growing up?
No,
Okay, maybe that because I
no,
did at my dad's house, and they would play Rabid Shivers. Had seen it multiple times before I even knew
yeah.
who Cronenberg was.
I was definitely 20 plus when I got into Cronenberg. It wasn't something that I really had access to or exposure to
hmm
when I was a child or a teenager. It was me deciding to explore this and go through. his filmography. Yeah, on my own terms, I guess, for sure.
That's good. I mean,
Yeah.
my family, especially on my dad's side, we'd always watch horror films and like in Canada for listeners,
Mhm.
for a channel that's Canadian owned, there has to be a certain amount of Canadian content. And the best way to do that in a horror channel is put Cronenberg stuff on. So I'd seen all those ones. And then when I finally heard about Cronenberg as a
Mhm.
bit older, I would have say like I probably started watching, I think, Videodrome and then The Fly
Mhm.
around like 17, 18. And I was like, okay, let me go back. And I was like, wait a minute, I've seen these movies before. But yeah, I don't know that I'd recommend like a 12-year-old watching Rabid, but
No.
you do you, I guess.
But also, we always joke about the night that we watched Petite Mama
Yeah.
at Tiff Bell Lightbox, and we got really, really drunk after. So a lot of the
Yes.
debauchery has been credited to Petite Mama, but that's actually incorrect. The
Hmm.
reason why we ended up getting so drunk after Petite Mama was because we got into talking about our love of David Cronenberg.
Yes.
And we just kept talking and talking about his movies and the impact these movies have had on us. And we just kept drinking.
Yeah.
And it
We
was
really
so
did.
fun.
Yeah. I remember that because it was essentially like we had to go through filmography. We were just at ordering glass after glass.
Yeah. What's your favorite? Rank them. Which one? Like, if we were having a great time. There's nothing more special, I think, than bonding over a David
I
Cronenberg's
know.
film.
I feel like the best people truly get something out of his work.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm excited to talk about Dead Ringers because I
Mhm.
hadn't seen it in a very long time. It would have been one of the earlier ones I watched when I started going through his stuff. And I think I'd seen it one other time. And I don't know, it was always never top of mind. But then when I think about Cronenberg, I think of Dead Ringers.
Mm.
So I was excited to rewatch it and definitely had like a great time watching it. But one of the first things I want to talk about before we even get into a lot of like the meat of the film is
Mhm.
just Cronenberg, Canadian. We all know that. I assume any listener knows that. This film is shot in Toronto. We both live in Toronto. A lot of films are shot
Mhm.
in Toronto, but they're often not Toronto. This one is Toronto. There's a title card saying this is Toronto for anyone watching it who probably is not going to recognize this Toronto.
Mhm.
So that's special
Oh, yeah.
because Toronto plays like a weird character. Because I think whenever Toronto is Toronto in his films, it seems very dark and desolate. And it's the way I think I envision Toronto, even though it might not actually look that way. But in my
Mhm.
mind, Toronto is very depressing. Um, just how do you feel about not only this film, but his career and using actual Canadian cities and putting these non-Canadian actors in those settings?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's great because he truly is a Canadian gem. And, I feel with Canadian film, sometimes it can be a little safe, but then you have these Canadian directors that actually really pushed the boundaries. Adam McGoyan, and
Yeah.
you have Cronenberg making these really boundary pushing films that you don't necessarily expect to come out of Canada for some reason, you know?
Yeah.
But at the beginning, when the title sequence is starting, you see, oh, hey, that's a Canadian casting director. Like, you
Hmm.
see familiar names that are very important in the film industry, the Canadian film industry, right there in the opening title sequence, and it feels very Canadian from the beginning. And when it veers away from Canada briefly, when they go to school,
Yeah.
you're like, go back to Canada. And then they go, okay, Toronto, 1988. And you're like, yes, we're back.
I know.
And then, that's the rest of the film. And it really does stay there. Yeah, I think it's great. It's also great to, hear people that you're familiar with working on a Cronenberg film or working on a
Hmm.
Brandon Cronenberg film. It's really special. So yeah, it kind of feels like our special thing in cinema. He's just so important.
It's weird to me because I think a lot of people, like you said, don't imagine Canadian films would be as boundary pushing or weird or
And
odd.
dark.
But then,
Hmm.
like, when you actually look at it, like, for the rest of us who do watch Canadian films, we know that most
Yeah.
of it is really weird and messed up. A lot of stuff from
Yeah.
Quebec. And, like, you got some, like, the two people you mentioned, Egoyan Cronenberg, Guy Madden,
Yeah.
who's doing some weird shit.
Hmm.
And there's just so many great directors and
Yeah.
people who don't get as much budget, unfortunately, for things like our other bestie, who's very different from this, but Xavier Dolan, who I can't even
Yeah.
talk about without
I
being
know.
depressed.
We're heartbroken.
It's like he's not even dead, but like retirement is basically death at that point. But
Yeah.
yeah, no, it's cool seeing that, and there is that kind of Canadian vibe to it, to the point where I was like, I couldn't remember if Don McKellar was in this movie or not, but I kept waiting for him to
Oh
pop
yeah.
up. He's not,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
One of your ultimate crushes.
Love him. Absolutely love him. He's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah. But then, you get to see him in Crimes of the Future
I do.
now being fantastic as always. I
Yeah,
love that he continues to work with these Canadian actors. It's great.
I know. The way the movie opens up, it's funny because it's like you get those like quick moments with them as two kids,
Mhm.
and they're already set up to be kind of odd with, the one boy, obviously Elliot, asking this young girl to have sex with him for research purposes. And she obviously says no and being
Mhm.
like, you're weird. So that sets off the tone right off the bat where you're like,
Mhm.
okay,
Yeah, that works really well, I think,
yeah,
coming right after the title sequence, 'cause honestly, that's one of the most beautiful title sequences in
I
this
think
film. It's
so.
one of my favorites of the Cronenberg film, and he always describes title sequences as the vestibule of the movie. It's
Hmm.
kind of this chamber that's opening into another. And this moves so beautifully into that opening scene because you are getting that imagery of these like medieval surgical tools, and you're getting these gothic images of these twins that
Hmm.
are being separated. And there's a lot of foreshadowing there. And a lot of, honestly, the end of the movie is there in the beginning. So then this is
Yeah.
moving into them as these two young twins. And it's a really interesting segue into these two characters. It's like you go from the beginning that's showing the end to the beginning, which is very
Yep.
cool.
A opening credit sequence is very powerful, and I don't know why people stopped making them, inventive or paying people to do something that's not just a black screen. That's for another conversation. But we ended skipping to modern day after we have the scenes of
Mhm.
them in college. They're two gynecologists, and both of them, same job. That's again, if you've watched a Cronenberg film, you kind of know you're just like, okay, I'm going to accept all these things. I'm not going to question anything. This is the least of the weird parts of this
I
movie.
know. Yeah.
It's still odd to see, even in modern day. I think a lot of people find it odd if a man chooses that specific profession. And the way it's tackled in this movie is that these two men are interested in women's bodies as kind of like objects to explore as opposed to human beings with emotions
Mhm.
until they're off the table. And then there's other things that they want to do with them. But when they're on that table, they're just so zero focused.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that? Because I think that's kind of a theme, not necessarily just with women, but in general, how he treats explorations of bodies in his movies is very clinical and scientific.
I know. Oh my gosh. Yeah, there's so much there to unpack just in that one theme. Yeah, it's so wild because when you think about the synopsis of this movie, it's like these two male gynecologists, these twins, and they, are sleeping with the same women. Wow, that
Hmm.
is
Yeah.
just so wild that you would come up with this plot. But I mean, it is based on the book Twins by Barry Wood and Jack Geesland, who that was a fictionalized story of real life twins, Stuart and Cyril Marcus, who were in fact twin gynecologists. So
Mhm.
there's that. That is real. These were two male gynecologists. They
Yeah.
both died together in really mysterious circumstances. So, like, right there, you have a real life story that David Cronenberg has been able to, like, put all of these themes onto, like, really dig into the idea of these two male gynecologists,
Hmm.
their connection with women. But yeah, the film is interesting because these two brothers do treat women in an experimental way. And we
Yeah.
do see that
Hmm.
from the beginning. And I think that it's interesting how he uses this to explore the horrors of women in a position of fragility and being vulnerable in the medical system, and how the medical system has been able to kind of take advantage of women who can't have children. You know,
Yeah.
costly fertility treatments that have low success rates. And there's a seduction of the promise that these treatments can make their dreams come true. And
Hmm.
Beverly and Elliot are seducing these women, and these women are trusting them, and they're being vulnerable around them, and they're in a kind of a desperate situation. They feel like they don't have any other options, and they really want this person to be, or these doctors to be the answer
Yeah.
to their dreams, basically. And I do think that, twin doctors aside, this is a criticism of being vulnerable in the medical system as a woman. I
Hmm.
think the horrors of a woman's body is obviously such a important theme in horror, but I think we finally have kind of reached a point where a lot of horror is focusing on the horror of motherhood,
Yeah.
where Cronenberg, he's always ahead of the game. He's always being progressive. He was already focusing on the horror of women who can't have children and what these treatments do to their bodies and their minds. And I just think he was, once again, like, kind of ahead of his time. And this is still very relevant when it comes to women wanting to have children. There's still no perfect solution. It's still trial and error. Women are still paying a ton of money. They're still putting, their bodies in the hands of these doctors who might not be able to make it happen for them. So I don't know. It's just so strange. The plot of this movie. It's like, how does this somehow work? This shouldn't work.
Yeah, especially like with like a man behind the camera and
Yeah.
writing it. I think that takes a lot of empathy on his
Yes.
part to make it so that you do feel like it is a criticism of that journey in life and the way the people behind who can make it happen or not make it happen for someone.
Mhm.
As opposed to being like he's on these doctors' side. He's very much showing them as people who are taking advantage of others and they really don't care about the lives of the people that they claim to be helping. It's really just
Mhm.
for their benefits. And
Mhm.
one of them wants to move up in
Yeah, their careers.
his
Yeah.
field, and the other one is just curious, to see
Mhm.
people's bodies, but he
See
doesn't
what
care.
happens. Yeah, to
Yeah.
experiment. The film also refers to the women who can have children as mutant women.
Yeah.
And it's this idea that you're a mutant woman if you can't succeed in, your quote unquote basic function of bearing a child, which is really scary to think about because, now it's a lot more accepted to decide to not have children as a woman. But
Hmm.
historically, you had to have children. You were expected to have children. That
Yeah.
really dictated your value as a woman. And Claire in this film is a representation of that.
Yeah.
And I think it's really interesting how they dress her in a masculine way and in kind of like an androgynous way. She, even when she's in the makeup chair at one point, she is like being dressed as a man. And she also, in her relationship with Beverly, she takes on more of the stereotypical male
Yeah.
characteristics. Like, she seems to be the more dominant one. She's the one that's being accused of the affair. She
Hmm.
is the one having to calm Beverly, he's very needy, he's very dependent, and generally women are portrayed this way in film way more often than men are.
Yeah.
So it's kind of this criticism of, if Claire can't have a child, does that diminish all her feminine qualities? Is she suddenly seen as more masculine because she can't have children?
Yeah.
It's an interesting way to look at it.
It is. And I mean, she even says it herself, essentially calls herself useless when she's told that it's
Yeah.
impossible for her to have a
Mhm.
kid. And she kind of puts up a barrier and loses all her emotions after that. Because before that, she's very emotional, but she's very kind of stoic. And I was reading, someone was talking about how one of the first scenes with her, not in the doctor's office, but when they go to dinner or lunch, it was, and she goes, talk to me about my uterus, just out like that. And
Mhm.
the other character is like kind of disgusted because that's the way most people would react, unfortunately. But just her forwardness and being like, I want to know, don't play with me like you would the
Mhm.
others. So it's interesting the way her character is treated. And for a long time, she's actually gone in this movie. And that's when shit gets down. We'll talk about that for sure. But her presence is lasting, but it's, I think, because she has a very dominant presence up there with Elliot, but they're the most
Mhm.
dominant ones. So,
Yeah. In terms of Cronenberg focusing on the gynecologists, being male, he talks about in an interview how when he was pitching this film to studios, they were very intrigued by the concept of the twins, but very repelled by the gynecology aspect
yeah,
of it. And
yeah,
how a lot of male actors didn't
mhm,
want to play a gynecologist.
yeah,
And he really wanted to explore the taboo of male gynecologists. And it's been since the medieval times. I went down a rabbit hole because of this film about medieval gynecology.
oh gosh, can't
And
imagine what that was like.
I know I'm always up for some fun. Um, in medieval times, like male doctors, they wouldn't touch this stuff
Hmm.
because of propriety. They morally just couldn't do it. It was seen as morally wrong to be treating women for these type of issues, period, fertility, all of that.
Yeah,
So, I mean, from the beginning, this has been taboo. And then I went down a rabbit hole of just modern day male gynecologists and the prejudices that are
yeah,
faced, you know?
yeah,
A lot of it comes down to the comfort of the woman. Like, women feel vulnerable
yeah.
around men, they just do. So, I to just see with Hollywood, well, men want to be action stars. They want to play heroes. They want to play, these stereotypical male characters. And
Hmm.
it's interesting that that was a thing that actors were like, oh, I don't know if I want to necessarily play like a gynecologist in a film.
I'm sure there would be some actors nowadays who would, but like I was reading about that
Mhm.
and how like I think they wanted De Niro at first and he said no because he didn't want to play a gynecologist. I can't even
Wouldn't that be
imagine him
just
in this.
wild? I can't see that at
I
all.
can't see him. And then he wanted William Hurt, which I could see William Hurt, but William Hurt was
Way
like,
more than De Niro, for sure.
yeah, De Niro, because he seems like, I don't know, there's just something about De Niro that he obviously could pull off playing twins, but not these twins. William Hurt has more of like a sicko
Hmm.
vibe to him.
Hmm.
But he was just like, yeah, I don't want to play two characters. One is enough for me. So
Hmm.
then we get Jeremy Irons, who absolutely just kills it. Like whenever I think of Jeremy Irons, I always think of Dead Ringers because unbelievable performance. And it's so wild to see how different the two are until it gets confusing because the story wants you to be confused about who you're seeing, which brother you're seeing. But he has made such distinct choices for each character. And I love his performance. I think it's hilarious that he just kept his accent.
I
The
know.
fact that he obviously they show him as a kid in Canada, so but that's That's whatever.
It doesn't even matter. Like, it's so funny
No,
because
you're
it
just
doesn't
like,
even
whatever.
matter. Like, you don't even notice it anymore. It's just him giving a wonderful performance.
Yeah.
It's truly two distinct people, incredibly so. And you forget that it is one actor.
Yeah.
You know it's Jeremy Irons, but the way he blends with the storytelling of this, how he created these two distinct people. And the best is the scene when they're supposed to be sitting side by side in the restaurant with Claire. And you can
Hmm.
see Claire telling them apart. And you act as Claire too. In that moment, you really actually can. And it's
Yeah.
because Claire gives us that intimacy, that
Hmm.
intimate look, that look into them.
Yeah.
And you start to be able to like really tell them apart through her eyes. I honestly think it might be one of my favorite performances. And in terms of Cronenberg, I will put this at the top
Oh,
alongside
yeah.
Jeff Goldblum in The Fly. I think
Mm.
I think it's up there. I think Jeremy Irons is like the top Cronenberg performance for sure,
I
and
think so
then
too. Yeah.
I would put Goldblum next. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to top something like this. And I do love that scene because up until then, we get a lot of scenes of them talking back and forth, and they're not often standing beside each other because it's obviously a lot for them to create this, in the 80s and have them do this. But
Mhm.
when they're talking to each other, you know which one is which because of their personality. But when they are in front of someone else and they become the same person, essentially, it's hard to tell who
Mhm.
is who in this. So for him to be able to do that, I don't know how he wasn't recognized by, our favorite Academy for this.
Mhm.
But it's just insane to me. He should have
Well,
been nominated twice.
I love his Oscar speech. He won for Reversal of Fortune. He didn't even get nominated for Dead Ringers. And it truly is such an incredible performance. And in his Oscar speech, he says, "Thank you also, and some of you will understand why. Thank you to David Cronenberg." And
Mm-mm.
there's this applause. And you know that he is actually thanking the director that gave him the actual Oscar winning performance, the
Yep.
one that led him to that. He's thanking him in that moment for something that he wasn't, fully acknowledged for. And
Yeah.
so that's a really, yeah, I think that's
That's
a
really
really
sweet,
special
actually.
moment. Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen Reversal of Fortune. It's good, but like it's nowhere near Dead
Hmm.
Ringers. It's great to see the physicality of his performances, but like just the physicality of everything in this. And sex is obviously a thing that comes up in almost all Cronenberg films. And
Yeah.
I've been saying this throughout the rest of the series, but like sex is a thing, a huge thing in his films, but it's never really sexy. Even a film like Crash, like it's not sexy.
I have that in my notes. It's like, are
Yeah.
Cronenberg sex scenes sexy?
At least I don't find them even remotely sexy, but they're
No,
fascinating to watch.
they are fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
like even like we were saying, the way he treats bodies and the way he in his films and why he's so known for the body horror
Mhm.
and the limitations of bodies, he treats sex the same way, kind of as something to be
Yeah.
studied and the boundaries that can be pushed. And we got some interesting sex scenes in this movie for sure. Some
Oh, yeah.
stuff being used to tie up some people, some interesting positions. How do you feel about those scenes in this movie, noting like that a lot of his other movies and the way he does it in them?
There is a sex scene in this, and I like howled the first time I saw it, and I howled again when I watched it again. Um, yeah, sex is such a clinical act in this, and there is a sex scene in this film where there is the use of some medical apparatus,
Yeah.
things that are associated with being sterile and being clinical. And,
Hmm.
maybe Cronenberg sex scenes are sexy for some. I mean, for me, they're very analytical.
Hmm.
They are a bit sterile. They're meant to be interpreted. They're meant to be interpreted. They're meant to be analyzed from a movie making perspective. They have interesting technical elements. They are, they are meant to arouse people, but not in the basic human needs way that you would expect. They make you feel vulnerable when you watch them because they make you feel uncomfortable. They're pushing your boundaries. And sometimes it feels like their sole purpose isn't to arouse you necessarily, but to get your brain actually going and get
Yeah.
you thinking about things, which is not necessarily always the most sexy, but it is very interesting
It
for
is.
sure. It's hard with Cronenberg too for some of this stuff to be sexy because he presents the body as disgusting.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, it's disgusting. It could be your enemy.
Hmm.
It can get decay. It can get sick. It can morph. It can mutate. It can change. And that isn't always the most hot thing, you know? He There's a good interview with him where he talks about how the body is reality. Like it's our connection to the physical world. And yeah, there's things about the body that are constantly being discovered. He is very fascinated with death and aging as well, and
Hmm.
seeing your body age. And, especially with The Fly, there's transformation, there's a constant state of change. His films are considered important and still relevant. The body is in this continual state of relevance, he says. So, yeah, I don't know. It's uncomfortable. It's
Hmm.
uncomfortable to think about
Yeah.
these things. So, it doesn't always put you in the mood with Cronenberg. Or, you know what? Maybe it does. And that's fine too, because it is fetishy as well. So that's fine.
I'm
You
sure
know?
there's some people who this is their thing, and I'm really not here to shame anyone on that.
Mhm, mm,
Um, but I think the reason why his films are feel so fresh through the
mhm,
years is because this is a topic that we can all relate to. Now, a lot of
mhm,
the stuff is hyper realized and like it might not happen that way in real life, but it could eventually down the line, who
mhm,
knows? But he is interested in body transformation and how the body kind of does its own thing and the
mhm.
way people try and control those changes because you see that throughout his films where something's growing out of someone or they're
I
aging and
know.
they're trying to stop it, but the body's going to do what it wants to do on its own, and you don't have
Listen,
that
as you get
control.
older, weird things start to grow in your body. It's just the way it
Yeah,
is.
it is.
Ugh. And
Yeah,
also just, with this film, like women being pregnant and their body changing and seeing all these things. But you have a child.
yeah,
You went through all of that.
yeah,
And then a woman not having a child.
yeah,
Also your body doing weird things.
yeah. On
And
like
then
a
women
monthly
go through
basis.
menopause.
Yeah,
And that gets all weird.
yeah. There's just never a dull
It's
moment
never
with,
ending with the body.
yeah.
What's it gonna do today? I don't know. But we
Who
love it. It's an
knows?
amazing thing.
Yeah,
It can, heal as well as it can horrify.
yeah, exactly.
So,
And I think that's especially what these characters are interested in. There's a scene that I find probably even more disturbing. There's a couple scenes in this movie that are well, there's a lot of scenes in this movie that are that stand out. But on this watch, there's two scenes that really stood out. The first that I want to talk about is the one where Beverly, Bev, is having a dream and he's attached to his brother Elliot.
mhm,
This is the one moment, real moment of body horror in this movie. The first one we
mhm.
really get.
This one is tame in terms of body horror, I feel
It
like,
really
compared
is.
to
It
his
really
other
is.
stuff. Like, it sneaks up on you, this one. Yeah.
It does. And to the point where you're like, okay. And you're not sure, is this going to be the rest of the movie? And it's
Yeah,
not.
you're like, "Oh, let's
So
see something gross. Come on. Where is it? When's it gonna
and
happen?"
it's totally fine. I was like, hey, listen, you gotta have at least one scene. But like they're kind of attached at the navel by this like
Yeah.
what looks like a very large umbilical cord is what I assume it's supposed to be. But before that, before we even see the cord, they're
Mhm.
essentially it's Bev and Claire in bed, and she's starting to have sex with him, and he's like, no, not while Elliot's watching. And Elliot's
He's
just
always watching.
hardcore, eye contact, watching. And she's like, okay, I can fix this. And she goes to bite said cord. And obviously he wakes up from said dream. It's a lot,
Mhm. Mhm.
but I think it's a really important scene because it really shows you. how terrified Bev is of his brother and the
Mhm.
power that he has on him, because that's one of those scenes where he becomes very childlike and he's like lying on her lap and she's caressing him and she's taking on kind of more a bit of a mother role to him in that moment, which is interesting how that plays out from that umbilical cord scene to her kind of being like his mother from that. Yeah, how do you read that scene? Because it does
Mm,
kind of come out of nowhere a little bit,
mhm. Well, the codependency in this movie, honestly,
to
it's
say the
it's
very
in
least.
it's intense. And I think it's easy at first glance to look at these two men and be like, okay, well, they're using their power to, seduce these patients and it's sleazy and stuff, which it is. There is also interesting psychology to these two. They don't function without each other. And
Hmm.
there's an aspect of them sleeping with the same women, and a lot of it, I think, is to avoid them having unique experiences.
Yeah.
They have to share every experience. And there's a moment where Elliot says, "You haven't had any experience until I've had it too."
Hmm. Yeah.
And as Beverly is becoming more unique in his feelings and his desires, he's pulling away from Elliot. And Elliot is losing control of him in a lot of ways. And it's really disrupting their codependent way of functioning. And Beverly begins to attach himself to Claire as the
Yeah.
dominant figure in his life. He needs another half. Neither of these brothers can function without the other one. He needs to fill that space. So much so that when Claire leaves to go film, he becomes a shell of a person. He's just not functioning. Becomes obsessed with his idea of fertility advancement, and all of this obsession extends beyond what is an acceptable standard of practice as a doctor. He just goes completely unhinged. And then
Yeah.
you see Elliot beginning to unravel as well, and both of them get caught up in drugs. It's this idea of this woman being this unique thing to one of them and really fully meaning something. And the fact that Beverly could love somebody more than Elliot. And that everything I just said is just summed up by that tree
Yeah. Yeah.
with her biting that umbilical cord that's holding them together. Like, they aren't Siamese twins physically, but their connection is just as powerful in terms of how they survive in the world. They need each other.
I mean,
Mhm.
even down to the point where you think that Elliot is presented as the one in power, but really they're so dependent on one another that the
Yeah.
power balance shifts. And you see it a lot towards when Elliot is like, well, the only way I can get my brother back is if I get on his level, and starts being, addicted to
Mhm.
drugs too, which is a wild way to think that you're going to get your brother back, is by being like, yeah, let's both become addicts and somehow we'll
Mhm.
manage to get out of this. And spoiler alerts, obviously we're talking spoilers, but one of them does
Yeah.
not. But side note, I always find it interesting. I remember that in this because I think I thought it the first time I watched it, right? I'm like, I wonder how many doctors do get addicted to drugs, prescription drugs.
Yeah. And the scary idea of a doctor being incapacitated and performing your
Mm.
surgery, like we see in this film.
Yeah.
Beverly's completely unhinged, and he's going in with those medieval gynecological tools,
Hmm.
performing on this poor woman. And
Yeah.
what a nightmare to think that we trust these people to have it together, right? We put so much faith, doctors and pilots.
Truly.
No substance abuse
I mean, I
on
would
the
hope
job.
not. Like, please, if you're operating any sort of machinery, let's not. I do think it's funny that the rest of the doctors didn't realize he was messed up until he got on the operating floor. And it's like,
Yeah.
you can sense that beforehand. But I do want to talk about, before I move on to the other thing that I want to chat about,
Mhm.
Denise Cronenberg, David Cronenberg's wife, costume design, beautiful costumes in this. Everyone looks fantastic. But those red robes that they're wearing in that scene, and the lighting, beautiful.
Yeah. Mhm.
It just sticks out. I wish we had kind of got more of those because they're absolutely insane.
Yeah.
I mean, if I woke up from surgery and my doctors were dressed in red, I'd be like, so
Gosh, I know.
a cult took over. I don't know what's happening.
It's so interesting because, well, I did read a quote of them talking about why they, went with that over regular surgeons' garments. And it's because the regular surgical outfits were boring. And David Cronenberg doesn't make a boring film.
Not
So
at all.
nothing's
No.
boring. So they chose these almost religious, cult
Hmm.
like red robe. And it's so fascinating because it has that religious element, and they are people of science that are essentially trying to play God.
Yeah.
It is such a cool juxtaposition because what they're wearing and what they're doing completely contradicts itself. Really bold and interesting choice.
Yeah. I mean, I think with Cronenberg, everything he has on screen has a purpose and a meaning. He's not just throwing anything up there just because. As much as he likes to say that sometimes, and I think sometimes obviously it's just like it happened that way on day of set, but I think he is definitely more, regimented than he likes to lead on. In a good way though, it
Mhm.
always translates really well. But before we even get to that scene, it's another scene with operating on a woman, but it's a scene with the woman who's getting her pap smear done. I assume it's pap
Ah,
smear.
I mean, that's already a nightmare having to get those.
Yeah, surely. And
Nobody likes having to do that.
it's just so upsetting. The whole concept of it, I've been putting mine off. I'm sure the audience wants to hear that, but my doctor's been asking, and I'm like, next time, next time. It's just not
Yeah.
fun vibes.
It's not. It's not. And if you get somebody, that's filling in for your doctor, maybe because they're on vacation and they're new to it cannot be, a pleasant experience. The things we have to go through, honestly. And we have to start getting mammograms at 40. Gotta get our, boobs just squished right down. I mean,
Yeah,
it's hard out there for us women and our bodies.
yep. And that's why I don't respect men. Um, and I'm glad that, well, no, it's weird because this scene is very hard to watch.
Mhm.
Um, and it's hard to watch whether you're a woman or not, if you have a vagina or not. The pain look on the woman's face is enough for you to cringe. But what really upsets me is that she's trying to kind of be like, oh, I'm sorry for feeling this way. I'm sorry for reacting
Yeah.
because he's making her feel as though she should not be in pain. And I feel like that's an experience that a lot of women can relate to, where you're being told that this is not going to hurt, this is not going to be uncomfortable for you, but it is, and you feel awkward or bad for pointing it out. So I am glad that Cronenberg added that part to it, that experience, because it's something that
Mhm.
a lot of us can relate to, and it's hard to see it on
Mhm.
screen.
Or it's, oh, you women with your low pain tolerance. It's like, we have the highest pain tolerance. If it
Literally.
hurts, that means it actually hurts.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Pain
Exactly.
tolerance is high.
Like stuff that I've experienced, I'm sorry, but you could not handle half of the stuff I've experienced physically. So please don't talk to me. But I hate seeing in a movie where someone's getting a pap smear. They're just like, oh,
Oh,
haha, and they're having a fun time. I'm like, that's not realistic. It's
no.
kind of like this scene, except, medieval tools are not usually being
Yes.
used.
Yeah. Listen, those tools have just recently started to look not as deflating. Okay.
Oh, what a rough life. What a rough life. Yeah,
Uh,
so that scene stands out. One of the last things I did, I know this is now the second time I said one of the last things. One of the last things before I pass it off to you to see what we haven't covered. There is a
mhm.
scene, and now I'm totally blanking. No, it's Beverly. And he's walking along the streets of Toronto, and he just vomits in a tree, and I just laughed so hard. I was telling you, I texted you earlier, and I was like,
You were
I've
like,
done
oh,
that.
relatable.
I've done that not once, but several times on the streets of Toronto. My vomit has been on almost every major block in the city.
Hmm. And you'll do it again.
I 100% will.
Siyama puts out another film.
Yeah. Should put out something really
We're
depressing
going
and we'll just
hard
get drunk.
for that French cinema.
Truly. I can't wait. But are there any parts of the story, filmmaking, or we haven't chatted about?
Well, I do love a quote from David, dear David, that I just love. And really does encapsulate this film and The Fly. He says, everybody's a mad scientist and life is their lab. We're all trying to experiment to find a way to live, to solve problems, to fend off badness and chaos.
Nice.
Yeah, we're all a mad scientist. Yeah, life
Yeah.
is our lab. The thing I think that I appreciate the most about him is that, and he's talked about this before in terms of the characters that he creates, is that he's fascinated by people that might have a solid place in society and could play by the rules and could play it safe. And the characters he loves to focus on are people that have willed themselves to the outer fringes of society. They are willingly doing this. They are choosing to be bold. They are choosing to be experimental. They are seeking danger with science and invention. And obviously that doesn't fully work out for them all the time. But at the same time, I think that there is a lot of parallels with him as a director and how he is a great example of someone who's like, I'm going to do me.
Yeah.
You know, he is truly unique and daring. And he is willing to be weird and he is willing to be repellent. And a lot of people aren't going to get his films. They're not going to get what he's doing. They're not going to maybe take anything from his films. But at the same time, he is never boring. And I always say, you know, cinema and the world would be a really boring place without David Cronenberg.
I know. Gosh, I don't even want to think about that. But even like his more what people would call the non-body horror or straightforward movies, they're never straightforward. He's never going to be boring, but it never feels like he's trying to be weird. He just is weird. Like he's a weird guy. But he's also like, if you ever see him, he would just look like the most normal dude. Except he has a striking face too, though.
He's so striking. And he always has these cool sunglasses on where, I mean, he would walk by and you'd be like, that's a filmmaker. Yeah.
Oh my God. If I walked by him, I would scream. Like actually scream, like fangirl, like the Beatles fangirls.
And you know what? Like this being in Toronto, there are possibilities.
I know, but like no one I know has ever just walked past him.
Oh, he seems very elusive.
I know. I'm like, what are you doing? Do you put on like a disguise or something or what? Because it's like there's no way you could just walk past Cronenberg and not know it's him.
Oh, I know.
Like, is he wearing a baseball cap or something? I don't understand. Like, I need to find
that.
out. I can't picture it either.
I just picture him in black with cool sunglasses on.
Truly. The way he should be. But that was Dead Ringers. This is a great conversation. It's interesting. I think it's important to talk about this movie in particular with a woman. Not that you couldn't get a good conversation out of a man by it, but I think it takes someone who's experienced a lot of these things to understand what he's going for and how he's actually able to tap into those things being a man. So
did you watch the show?
No, I was going to ask you about that.
I didn't either, but he's not associated with it. So he's not associated with the show, so that put me off a little bit, to be honest.
Yeah. I do like Rachel Weisz.
I do too. I might watch it. I think that, you know, especially with this conversation that we've had about the film, there's such a well of things to discuss because they are male gynecologists. Like those issues are probably not present in the same way with the show. I would be interested to see what themes they touch on with it being two women as the doctors. I just do it. I haven't been really like jazzed about it or anything.
Yeah, I know. I know a few people who are Cronenberg fans who've watched it and they liked it. So that's at least something. But I mean, I haven't watched it because I almost never watch TV. But it would be something I would watch eventually someday. So I'm glad it was like a mini series and it wasn't something that you tried to like stretch out the story for years. Yeah. Like we don't need 7 seasons of
Dead Ringers, the television show.
But at least they had that decency for sure. But we can move to the last portion of the show and credits, and we're still talking Cronenberg. I know you've probably seen basically everything he's done, almost everything. If someone's coming up to you says, I've never seen a Cronenberg film before, where are you directing them? What film would you recommend they start with, and why?
Yeah, I think that a safe bet would be The Fly, because I do think it's the most accessible in terms of story. It is an introduction to the extent of like his body horror. It truly is so gross.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's really gross and wonderful. And it has Jeff Goldblum. I just feel like it's like the crowd pleaser of his filmography. So if you
Yeah, it
felt a
is.
little intimidated by Cronenberg, then I feel like The Fly is a good one. You could also start with Videodrome because I feel like that was such a milestone in his career. That's one that I know. I mean, you obviously did film school, so you can confirm or deny this, but I know that's one that is studied
Yeah, it is.
in film school. That's kind of the one. But if you're feeling really ambitious, I think you really can start at the beginning of his filmography and just go through it.
Mm-hmm.
You can do it. Like you can just go see it where it all began and like watch the evolution of it. And I think that would be a fine experience. One thing I wouldn't do is start with his non-body horror when he gets into the 2000s, because I don't think that's a representation necessarily of the extent of who he is as a director. I feel like you would want to have a little bit more of his filmography under your belt before venturing into like his non-body horror work. And I wouldn't start with something like Existence, his like late 90s.
Yeah.
Even though it is body horror, I just feel like it's leading into the 2000s, and it's great to watch, but it's not like a starter.
No. Yeah, no. As much as I love Existential, I wouldn't recommend it as a starter. Yeah. Those are interesting ones. For this one, again, throughout the series, I usually get the same answer. So for Cronenberg, I was like, depending on the person, if I feel like they're going for more of a horror vibe, my go-to would be to recommend Videodrome. But if I think that something more psychological would get them on the train, my pick was Dead Ringers for people, because I think this could be a good way to get you into stuff and slowly ease you into the body horror if you're not someone who's ready for it.
Yeah. A little bit worlds there.
But you could definitely start at the beginning with his, because I think he's one of those directors because sometimes at directors, you're like, the first 3 would put you off, or they're kind of rough, where you're like, you maybe need to watch some more so that you can understand where they started.
Well, I was feeling ambitious in my Cronenberg quest, and I started right at the beginning.
I think with his work you can, because I think it's good right from the start. So you're really not going wrong. And you're going to have fun seeing the evolution of his career up until what we're getting this year. I think The Shrouds is supposed to come out end of year, or maybe early next year. I'm not sure. Yeah, it's been great following along with his work. And obviously, when his stuff first came out, we would have been not alive or too young. But like, we have lived through enough of his career to be like, oh, this is someone that we've lived with and proud to have. But Dead Ringers, double bill. If you're going to pair this film with another one or other multiples, what film or films are you pairing it with?
Well, obviously, I have a list of multiples here.
Yeah.
Because I never just pick. I'm going to be rambling off a bunch. Yeah, I think that some double bill possibilities with Dead Ringers. If you want to go sibling twin themed, you could even do Dead Ringers and just be like, oh, I want something like not as psychologically taxing necessarily. And you could do the Skeleton Twins with Kristen Wiig and Bill Hader, which is a movie that I really like. They have a really interesting dynamic. They're two really great comedians that are playing more of a dramatic role, and I think it's a really interesting watch. And then you will love this one, and it's probably on your list, but Sisters, Brian De Palma. That's kind of a really solid double feature there, but it's definitely more similar in terms of tone and horror. And then I think that it might be fun to just check out the new directors of body horror.
Okay.
You could keep it in the family. You could watch Possessor, some Brendan Cronenberg, a little back-to-back Cronenberg action. Yeah. And then also check out some Julia DeCurnau, watch some Raw, Tan, watch some of her stuff, because she is a newer horror director that's doing really well with body horror.
I know he's a big fan of hers too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then also, if you want to do some surgeons gone mad, check out Eyes Without a Face. Surgeons, doctors doing weird things. The Skin I Live In, a little Motivar. That's fun too.
Those are all good options. I mean, you really can't go wrong with any of those. I don't know. I didn't think of Eyes Without a Face. And that makes like perfect sense.
Doctors
All of
doing
them do.
weird things they shouldn't be doing.
Yeah.
Surgeons being weird.
Tell me about it. Yeah. Don't want to be in that position.
Yeah.
I have a couple. I guess who I am. They're ones that are pre-70s. The first one, oddly enough, there's a movie called Dead Ringer with Betty Davis.
Oh, with Betty Davis. Okay.
In 1964. She plays twins in this movie too. And because it's Betty Davis and it's later Betty Davis, she's going all out, wilding it up. It's great. It's actually a good movie. So there's one twin that just goes obviously off the rails, as twins seem to do. I wonder how twins feel about watching themselves, their culture on film. There's always just like one evil twin.
I know. That's what I think I like about Dead Ringers is like, they both are problematic in their their own way.
Very
One
much.
isn't even necessarily worse than the other.
Yeah, I know. They're just doing it in their own specific way.
Yeah.
They're both equally as bad. So that one, or you can go to 1946 with The Dark Mirror. And this is Olivia de Havilland playing twins. And again, it's good also. And it's Olivia de Havilland. She's obviously a phenomenal actress who plays twins, I should say. And I think with these two movies that I'm recommending, I'm thinking of Jeremy Irons and his performance. And I think if you want to see actors doing twin performances really well, I think those would match with his, because there's plenty of people who play twins over the course of cinema, and some people don't do it as well as this. It's very hard to do it without it being kind of like a joke, or it's like you don't believe for 1 second that these two people are twins. But with these 3 performances, or I guess 6 technically performances, you can definitely tell they're all great actors in their own right. So I don't think you can go wrong. But those, I would definitely probably end with Dead Ringers and watch one of the 2 early ones first to prep you for what's to come. I don't know that you can follow up an older movie from watching Cronenberg. You'd just be like, oh, this seems very tame compared to anything else. But yeah, well, thank you for joining me again for the 3rd time talking about, you brought a great movie. I'm glad that you picked this. I had a lot of fun.
Just a pleasure, honestly. We aren't drunk this time.
No, we really are not.
About Dear David.
Very lucid, actually.
Listen, I see it in our future. I see a drunk night in our future. Cronenberg has a new movie coming out, Celine Sciamma at the height of her career. She's got movies coming out.
Yeah.
Lots of chances.
I know.
to be debaucherous.
That's 2 at least. To leave our mark on the streets of Toronto with a little bit of vomit. Seeing Faces and Movies is an official podcast of the Royal Film Club. It's hosted and edited by Felicia with intro music by Lamar Bacher. If you like what you heard, let us know at seeingfacesandmovies.com or send us an email at seeingfacesandmovies@gmail.com. And while you're at it, please subscribe and rate the show wherever you listen to your podcast, and stay tuned for our next episode on Videodrome.